Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Travis Kaya, Executive Secretary of the Asian Pacific American Bar Association and co-chair of our Professional Development Committee. We're excited that you've joined us here this evening for this Pathways to Public Interest panel. What we know will be an enlightening conversation for law students and attorneys who are interested in building a career in public interest. We have the privilege tonight of presenting this program in cooperation with a number of wonderful co-sponsors. They include the Arab American Lawyers Association of Southern California, the Asian Pacific American Lawyers of the Inland Empire, the Asian Pacific American Women's Lawyers Alliance, Black Women Lawyers Association of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles chapter of the Federal Bar Association, the Japanese American Bar Association, the Korean Prosecutors Association, the Korean American Bar Association, Latina Lawyers Bar Association, LGBTQ+ Lawyers Association of Los Angeles, the Mexican American Bar Association, the South Asian Bar Association of Southern California, the Southern California Chinese Lawyers Association, and last but not least, the Women's Lawyers Association of Los Angeles. We especially want to thank our esteemed panelists for sharing their wisdom and experience with us this evening, and especially our moderator and former APABA president, Karin Wang, for her vision and all her work in bringing us here together tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the stage off to Karin to kick off tonight's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much to Travis and to APABA and Apala and the other bars, and to my fellow, my friends and colleagues who are here tonight. Thank you to all of you who've joined us and are interested in exploring this issue of transitioning to public interest. I think I speak for all four of us when I say we are delighted that so many of you are interested, and we welcome you with open arms into the public interest sector. I'll just say a little bit more about myself and then explain the panel and then jump into a moderated Q&A. I put this, I think, in the chat to all of you, but if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A function. We may pick up some of those as we go along. We also have set aside some time at the end of our kind of structured Q&A panel to take more individual questions or questions we didn't get to. So I, besides being part of APABA for many years, I am currently the executive director at UCLA Law School of the David J. Epstein program in public interest law and policy. And we are a unique program that trains future public interest lawyers and leaders. And before UCLA, I worked in the nonprofit civil rights advocacy and enforcement, government civil rights enforcement community here in Los Angeles for more than 20 years, although I did start my career at a big law firm, Morrison & Foerster in San Francisco for 2 years. And so I share that commonality with my panelists here tonight, in that we all started in the non-public interest sector and made our way into public interest work at different points in our career. I wanted to explain the reason we put this together is that, and I see this a lot with the students at UCLA and other students and lawyers I talk to, but many folks enter law school aspiring to do public interest work. I think this has been particularly true the last few years. I think the Trump administration and era really, I think, opened the eyes of a lot of folks going to law school and really became a pivotal focus for people wanting to become lawyers. But we know that for various reasons, it can be hard to jump right into public interest work coming out of law school. It can be tough to find entry-level positions. A lot of folks will carry significant debt, and that is a very real issue. So we know many people start out in the private sector, but have goals to shift at some point into public interest work. So this panel is really about for folks who are thinking down the line about wanting to make a change soon or in the future, some things to think about, and exploring the journeys of 3 particular lawyers who have done that. So we're going to hear from our 3 panelists. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in a moment. They're going to talk about their transitions to public interest work, as well as advice that they have for those seeking to make a similar change into either their organizations or similar ones. The 3 panelists that I'm delighted to welcome tonight are Lin Fu, who is currently the Vice President of Legal Services at Tzedek, and they're a multi-issue legal services organization here in LA. Vidhya Ragunathan, who is the Director of Pro Bono at Inner City Law Center, also a direct legal services organization primarily. You guys can correct me if I summarize your organizations wrong, but very focused for many years on housing and homelessness issues. And Christina Yang, who is my former colleague, who is now General Counsel and also Pro Bono Director, because you can never wear too many hats in public interest. She's at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Southern California. which is a civil rights and legal services group rooted obviously in the Asian American community. So before I turn to the panel, Travis, I've got to check with you. Do you have the poll that we can share with the audience to find out a little bit more about them?
Yes, let me launch that now.
Okay, so this is a really short poll. Please answer. We just want to tailor our comments better to who's here. While you're answering that, I'll just continue with my explanation of the panel tonight, which is our structure is that we're going to do a moderated Q&A. So we have a number of questions that the panelists are prepared to answer. And then we will open it up. That's the first hour. And then we've set aside roughly up to 30 minutes to open up for additional questions. And again, you can put questions in the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can also, I believe we will enable the microphones in the open Q&A session. So if you want to ask your question verbally, you can do that. Travis, do we have enough responses? Can you summarize? Can you show the,
so
show the
sharing the results now?
Okay. So we have, of the people who responded, we have a range of people, but it looks like the largest group is folks who've been out less than 5 years. And we also have STEM folks who are a student or just graduated. So early career, and then we have a few people who are, I think, mid-career. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn to the panel now and ask them to talk a little bit about themselves, introduce themselves more fully, and talk about their work and how they found themselves on this path. And while they're talking, I will drop their fuller official bios. We'll find a way. I think I can share that with you through chat. So if you want to know more about their official bio, you can look at that, but I will let them do kind of their personal introductions now. And I'm going to start with you, Lynn.
If I can find my unmute button. Hi, everyone. My name is Tzung-Lin Fu. I usually go by Lynn. I currently at Tzedek. I am a first-generation immigrant from Taiwan. I came here after college, identify as cisgender female and bi. Also currently a divorced single parent of 2 children. Also, so I went to law school thinking I would do immigrant rights work because I'm myself a first-generation immigrant. And then I started doing some clinical work and also interned in some public interest organizations when I was in law school, mostly doing a DV, domestic violence / immigration work. But I knew I couldn't start doing that right away because I, like many people, have law school debt. I intended to be in public interest shortly after being in private practice for a couple of years. It took me 11.5 years. So it's a little bit longer than I had hoped for. But during that time, I was a patent litigator first. And then when I left private practice, I was a white-collar lawyer at Gibson Dunn, LA, doing FCPA investigations involving China. I will say that those roles made me very comfortable being often the only Asian woman lawyer in the room. And I think and also made me very comfortable being the person in the room that perhaps doesn't know the most about something. And I think those things actually am serving me well now that I've transitioned in public interest. So I switched over in public interest about 4 years ago, first at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles as one of their directors of litigation, and now at Tzedek as a VP of legal programs, which means I supervise all of the supervising, directing attorneys for all of our legal work.
Hi, everybody. I'm Director of Pro Bono Inner City Law Center, like Karin said. I moved to the United States when I was 6. Similar kind of first generation experience. I moved to Texas, which was, certainly an interesting place to go to in the early 90s. I probably wouldn't choose to go there again. But then moved out to California, and I've been in California for the majority of my life, really. And then the last year and a half, in the next couple of years, I'm actually currently abroad. So I'm sort of working super remotely and getting to do my fantastic work from other parts of the world. So, I went to law school largely because, no immigrant parent tells you to go out there and make as little money as possible. But I also did not want to be an engineer. I did not want to be an IT person. I did not want to do any of the things that, South Asian people are told to do in order to have a successful career. But I also wanted, the ability to kind of take care of myself and my family financially. I didn't want to kind of completely go off the beaten path. So I became the first lawyer in my family. I kind of navigated that really by myself. I don't think my parents had a clue what, law school was or how to apply or any of those things. So went through all that and then went to a large law firm, went to Kirkland and Ellis right out of law school because, that's, I think, what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to go to a large law firm. That's what everybody around me was doing. And that's what I thought I had to do. And so I went and was a general litigator there, and then moved over to Crowell and Mooring after a few years in their Orange County office, and spent about 5.5 years in private practice, and then just realized I wanted kind of a different approach, and that I was ready to take the leap. And I'll kind of talk more about that later. But I've been at Inner City Law Center for about 7.5 years, always in the pro bono role. Which has been really great because I get to work with all of the people I knew at law firms, and I get to bring that network and that understanding of law firms with me, but I don't actually have to do that work. So I feel like I'm sort of in the perfect place and getting to do a really unique kind of niche job that I think a lot of law schools don't, law students don't realize even exists. And with that, I'll hand it off to Christina.
Thanks, Vidhya. Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Yang. I'm the General Counsel and Pro Bono Director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Southern California. We just changed our name. It's been a whopping 9 days. Very similar to our old name. But I'm really happy to be with you all today and to be on a panel with two ladies and a moderator who used to be my supervisor when she was still with us. So it's really great to be here with you all. As for my path to where I am now, I've actually been in the pro bono director role at Advancing Justice for almost 8 years now. I have Karin to thank for hiring me into that job. And I have a prior history with the organization as well. I graduated law school in 2009 during the last recession, which was a time during which many law firms were panicking about bringing on first-year associates and realizing how expensive that endeavor was. So I was lucky in the sense that had I graduated a year or two prior, that was when job offers were being rescinded out of thin air, and people were sort of found, without a job at all when they expected to go to one after graduating as a 3L. So my year was when many firms were doing these things called deferral fellowships, which is a fancy way of saying we'll put you on hold for a fraction of your first year salary. We'll probably need you later, but we don't want to pay you the whole amount to sit around and do nothing. So I was lucky to spend my deferral fellowship year at Advancing Justice with the litigation unit. And I was able to get that position because of my 1L summer that I also spent the litigation unit. And this was during the time when Julie Sue was our litigation director. And it was really wonderful to get to work with her on plaintiff side work. She was really one of my inspirations and North Stars for going to law school in the first place. As a sophomore in college, I heard about a big multiracial plaintiff class action that Julie was working on against Abercrombie and Fitch, which had some really problematic employment practices at the time. Surely have been reformed now, certainly. But that was when I first came to hear about Advancing Justice, which was known as APABA back then, and was really interested in going to law school as a pathway to serve the AAPI community specifically. And like Lynn and Vidhya, I headed into law school with a sort of notion of what I might do postgraduate, but certainly there was, quite a lot of debt involved in undertaking the law school endeavor. And I did find myself wanting to, get rid of that debt as quickly as possible. Also just wanted to save some money. And so ended up going the more, what I would think of as the traditional path, which I think my co-panelists also took, which was, doing OCI, spending 2L summer at a firm, and then planning on going there right after. So after my deferral fellowship, I did return to the firm where I'd spent my 2L summer, which was Mayer Brown here in LA, and spent a few years there as a litigator, just doing general commercial litigation on the defense side. And after a few years there, wanted to go back to nonprofit in some capacity, but wasn't quite sure what exactly, still wanted to litigate, ended up going to an in-house position at an HIV/AIDS nonprofit called AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and was there for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And at that point, found myself, A, really not wanting to litigate anymore, was feeling really burned out, and B, really wanting to go back to AAPI work specifically. And so this is where APABA comes into the picture, as it has so many times in my professional history. At the time, I was on the APABA board with a wonderful woman named Nisha Vyas, who was the sort of inaugural pro bono director at Advancing Justice LA. But ironically, she missed practicing law, and so she was going to transition back to practicing in nonprofit. And so I talked to her about an opening for a pro bono director at another nonprofit. She encouraged me to actually apply for her position, which at that point hadn't been posted yet. I also was a lot more junior than her, so I was like, oh, I don't know if this really works, but she encouraged me to go for it anyway. And I kept in touch with Karin and others at Advancing Justice, so that kind of helped, I think, get my foot in the door. And the rest is history. About 4 years ago, and shout out to Karin again, she encouraged me to take on an in-house legal counsel role for the organization as well, which was also a role that hadn't existed previously at the organization. And like Vidhya, I really enjoy the aspect of my job that involves doing the matchmaking, finding the right support externally that helps our staff do all the amazing work that they do on the ground. So I will pause there if I can go on for hours.
Great. Thank you to all three of you for sharing a little bit more about your journey. It's interesting because there's definitely some commonalities, but also some distinctions. And I thought it was interesting for, given the range of where the audience is in terms of being in law school, out of law school, it sounded like, amongst the four of us, it was anywhere from less than a couple of years to 11 plus years to make the jump, which is also consistent. When I was at Advancing Justice, we hired a number of people, including people who have been out anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So there's no perfect time. There's no right time. Just if it's the right time for you, you'll know, and you can make it happen. So we're going to shift to some questions that the panelists are prepared to answer, and hopefully we'll cover some of the questions you might have. We're going to start with some personal reflections on transitioning to public interest, and then we will get more into some explicit advice about if you're kind of ready to, or about trying to get prepared to make the jump. What are some things to think about? But on the personal reflections piece, I want to start with my first question is, how did you know it was the right time to transition into public interest? I think this feeds off my last comment, where I think sometimes people feel like I have to do a certain number of years, or there has to be like this clear moment when I make the change. But so how did you know? I think, Christina, you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Karin. And I started touching on this in my intro as well. But I think it was a bit of a combination of having reached the financial goals I had set up for myself while I was still at the firm, and also feeling like I wanted to seek fulfillment elsewhere, and also and I think those two kind of go hand in hand, because of course there are folks who would love to go in public interest, but perhaps it's just too difficult financially, right? So for me, those two kind of had to align at the right time. And I think for me also wanting to find the right opportunity. And I think Vidhya was touching on this earlier, but certainly when I was in law school, I never really considered, pro bono professional as something that I might necessarily end up doing down the line. And of course, after graduating, I became aware of it, but wasn't really sure when exactly it might fit into my career trajectory.
So I want to pick up on something you mentioned, Christina, and actually ask all three of you this, because I think this may be the single most asked question, or the central question to many people, given the pay disparities between, even a mid-sized law firm and public interest. I will say public interest is catching up. There has been a lot happening with unions and kind of pay equity and transparency. So it is better than when I left the nonprofit sector less than 5 years ago, but there is still a discrepancy. But the question I have for the panelists is, so did you find the transition into public interest to be financially difficult? And Christine, you mentioned this, like how did you prepare for the transition while you were still in private practice? And maybe let's start with Vidhya, then Lynn, and then Christina, because I think you all have thoughts.
So I didn't know really too far ahead of time that I was going to make the jump. I was kind of like looking, and then this position came up, and I was like, I'm going to apply. And then about a month later, I got the job, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm done. It was more of like let's kind of wait and see what's popping up there. I knew I didn't want to be a staff attorney. I knew I wanted a different role, I didn't quite know what I was looking for. So I did kind of prepare, like ahead of time. But what I did do was when I was in private practice, I had this rule that like anytime I got a bonus, I used it to pay down like an entire student loan. So like every time I got a bonus, it would I would knock them down by like which had the highest interest rates. So that and I still had a little bit of debt when I came to Inner City Law Center, but it was nowhere near what I had when I started. So I think a part of it is be really mindful if you're at a firm of the fact that you make a ton of money. Be financially smart, set aside that money and save it so that when you make the leap, for me, it was a change, right? Like I noticed it. I didn't kind of do all the things. I didn't kind of live exactly the same life I did before. But I also, it did kind of send me into poverty. Because I think I planned for it and because I knew, this was fine. And I didn't have like the same debts. So it made it a lot easier. So if you know this is a path you're going to go down, just really start thinking about what you're using your money on and what you're spending it on. And I will say, I think not having to worry so much about the finances is, I recognize that's a very privileged position to be in. Especially to be at a nonprofit and not to have to worry about it so much. But it makes me really, I think it lets me just focus on my job in a way that I don't think I would have otherwise been able to.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different situation. I knew I wanted to be in public interest when I went into law school. And when I came out of law school and realized that I had to do a few years where I could pay down my loans, I knew that that's where I will eventually return to. So my entire time in private practice, I've been preparing for the moment of the jump. So I paid off my student loans in the first 2 years of practice. And I graduated in 2006. So 2006 to 2008 was not a pretty place to be. And I was very fortunate and very grateful that I was able to pay off my debt by the end of 2008. And that's when my first child was born. And then I think the big thing was to try and live as if you're already a public interest. So if you pretend that you are already in public interest, all that excess is like, you don't really have that money, you put it aside. So I think I was very diligent first in terms of paying off the debt, and then in terms of paying into my retirement account later on when I had children, paying for the 529, paying for the down payment and then the mortgage of my condo, which I now own, and buying a home, which was important, that was going to be affordable when I become a public interest lawyer, because I always knew I was going to be one. It actually was more financially difficult than I had anticipated it to be, because for 7 years, I was the sole breadwinner in my family. And then at the moment of the jump, it was actually a culmination of big personal changes. I was in a marriage that became abusive, and so I had to leave my marriage and leave. And also, while I was making that change, I was like, well, part of the reason I was stuck here was because of this partnership, but I don't have that anymore, so now's the time. So I actually picked the most financially difficult time to transition to public interest. So not only did I have a huge pay cut, but I also had litigation costs in my family law case, and I also had support to pay my ex-spouse who was not earning an income. But because I was doing all these things the previous years, it was difficult for a few years. But then after the support started falling away, I'm okay now. So I think had it not been for a lot of conscientious, like financially being fiscally conservative, I think I would be in a place where I probably wouldn't have been able to make a jump.
Thanks for sharing, Lynn. I knew most of that, but not all of it. So thank you. I just want to, in one of our prep calls, I was sharing that since I kind of headed into term knowing that I was going to leave and, as quickly as possible between us and a wall, I intentionally chose to live at home with my parents when I came back to LA after graduating. Of course, this was super not common, to say the least, out of my class of like 10 incoming first-year associates. I moved back home to Torrance. I was commuting downtown. I was driving the 93 Camry that I learned to drive on when I was 16. So there was a lot there, but I definitely did it, I think, with the goal of wanting to make the jump at some point whenever I thought it was feasible. And I think, like Vidhya was touching on, there's this and I think also Lynn as well, just like, not necessarily, getting too caught up in keeping up with the Joneses. I think there is such an immense amount of money that you're handed in that first paycheck as even a first year associate that it does become really tempting, especially after spending, in some cases, maybe the last 7-8 years as a student, not having much income, presumably, that you're going to, buy the nice car, get the nice condo or apartment. But to just really keep in mind that at some point your income's going to drop, and to just be prepared to make that adjustment for sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you. I'm getting flashbacks listening to all of you because I had very similar experiences. I just wanted to add one thing, and I mentioned this in response to one of the Q&As. I think that now people graduating can realistically consider things like public service loan forgiveness, which if you work 10 years, and it doesn't have to be consecutive, it can be non-consecutive, 10 years in government or nonprofit, you can get to a point where the government forgives the balance of your loans. I think you're hearing from many of us, including me. I worked in a law firm long enough to pay off what was a smaller debt load at that time. And I had a friend who had a date circled on his calendar like a year and a half out that he was going to leave the firm when he paid off his loan on that day, and he actually left. So, there's a couple strategies to dealing with debt. I just wanted to mention that we don't personally have experience with public service loan forgiveness because we all have paid off our debt in different ways earlier, but that is an option for many people now. In terms of challenges, Lynn, I think when we were prepping, you mentioned that there were, besides finances, there were other big challenges. So I don't know if you want to address sort of the non-financial challenges you also dealt with, and then we'll turn to one other big question around work-life balance after that.
Sure. I think a few things. One is emotional boundaries. So I mentioned that I was first a patent litigator and then a FCPA investigator. And honestly, if someone won or lost, I hate to say it, I don't really emotionally invest in who got the patent right and who didn't get the patent right. Whereas now in public interest, my clients and my team's clients, if they lose, they get kicked out of their rental housing. And we were on the phone with some clients who literally my staff person was in the house with them when the sheriff came and locked them out. And that is emotionally devastating for all involved. And so I think even more than all of the other work I've ever done, that requires an amount of boundary setting that you need to be very mindful of, and you need to really make time to shut that off and do stuff for yourself and have time for yourself so that you can recharge and come back and be useful to your clients. That's one thing I think I knew conceptually, but in reality is still a lot harder. The other thing I wanted to say is obviously a lot of the work that I have to do now in this role are different. And I had a lot of different pro bono experiences, but I haven't had all of the pro bono experiences. And one glaring area I didn't have any experience in was housing, unlawful detainer eviction cases. And for 7.5 months in this role, I had to basically supervise our housing team. So learning from scratch on the double, while people are breathing down your neck is something I think that the law firm does kind of prepare you for if you're really comfortable with, I don't know, I'm going to learn it, I'm going to be resourceful. Nevertheless, it did still feel pretty daunting at first to face all the things that I didn't know. And then finally, one thing that surprised me was because I was at a law firm where I was doing investigation work. So, and I also was on flex time. So I had this ebb and flow. Sometimes I was really busy. And then once my investigation wrapped, I kind of took a breath and like laid low for a while, not take on another case for a while. And then I jumped back in. At the legal ways I've been at, that hasn't been the case. It just keeps coming. So like if you think that you're gonna burn yourself out and then you're gonna have a time to catch a breath and then you're gonna jump back in, don't do that. It's just like, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, those are good points, Lynn. And it's interesting listening to you talk, especially about that first point about the emotional boundaries, because I think the flip side to that was I remember litigating in a large law firm and like basically defending corporate clients from, accusations of bad acts and feeling so unmotivated to get out of bed and put in like the 14-hour days. And the flip side, and I think this was easier when I was younger and didn't have kids, but I appreciated going to a job where actually I liked all my coworkers and we all wanted to be at work, right? Like we all, despite how hard it was, we actually wanted to help the clients. These are people we cared about. They were not like the nameless, faceless, patents that you're achieving. So
Yeah.
there is, it's a fine line, right? And that balance is important. So the question I want to ask all three of you here is, do you find work-life balance easier to achieve in public interest? Not sure if there's a clear answer to that. I think both Christina and Lynn definitely had thoughts on that. So let's go to Christina first.
Sure, yeah. I think it's a little bit hard to make a direct comparison for me in some ways. And Vidhya was touching on this earlier about how one of the things that she enjoys about being pro bono director is that you're supporting all this great work, but you're not actually the one who's directly doing it. And I certainly feel similar about my job as pro bono director at Advancing Justice. But because I'm not like in the weeds hands-on, as I was, in my prior roles after law school, I do feel like, there is an ability to, to define those boundaries and, have a bit more work-life balance versus, let's say, being one of our staff attorneys who I see working so incredibly hard. And, certainly I would say no less hard than folks at firms. And, they're also dealing with these sort of boundaries and like emotional investment piece that Lynn was talking about as well, which can also be really taxing. But I think I also want to just touch on that there is, I think, just an aspect of whatever role you have in public interest, you're, might be wearing multiple hats or doing a very soup to nuts approach to the work, like there's no more admin support, no more sending your document to word processing, which I miss tremendously, even though it's been like 10 plus years now since I've had that. You're doing your own expenses, whatever, right? So there's I think some other aspects that require leaning in different ways than, just the work, but it's no less important. And like that can also be areas that require time and energy.
Jump in. I think for me, I have found for the most part it to be easier to maintain work-life balance since I transitioned to nonprofit. Now I said for the most part because there certainly was the 7.5 months when I was trying to supervise housing where I think I've never worked that hard in my whole life, bar none. But with the exception of that, a few things. One is because the job I came from in private practice was a FCPA investigation in China job. So there was a lot of late nights because I was working with people in different time zones. There's a lot of travel. There's a lot of travel on short notice. And whereas that was difficult, but kind of a doable at the time, once I became a divorced single parent, it is like not possible. Whereas the nonprofit work, at least the way I do it, is very local. So I don't really travel. I'm always close to my kids. I'm able to go pick them up. And also, I have found the nonprofits realize that we're not able to pay people as much as private practice, right? So we tend to have better benefits, and part of the benefits is like the actual benefits of like insurance, but part of the benefit is, you know, like our organization, for example, is still allowing people to do remote work for the most part. And we do have comp time if you work more hours this day and you want to work less hours that day. We do have vacation time. So I just came back from a 4-week vacation, which is unheard of in private practice. Now, you have the opportunity to have these flexibility to kind of find your work-life balance. There's some part of it is still you have to take it. And I think that's the same in private practice, but I have found that the balance is better for me.
Yeah, I think I had a very similar experience. I remember finding it incredibly difficult to take a vacation in the firm. I think it just felt like there was always this pressure to like not really go on vacation. I mean, no one would like really directly say no, but it was more like the signs you were getting and the lack of encouragement. And I found, I remember as a manager in a nonprofit sector feeling like, you know, if we can't make up for it in pay, we can make up for it in things like flexibility and being understanding about needing to take time off for personal reasons, for vacation, to be with family. So it may not be true across the board, but I do feel like the nonprofit and public interest sectors in general are better and more cognizant of that. I wanted to, I think we could talk about this forever, but I wanted to kind of pivot to the other kind of key set of issues we wanted to cover, which is, you know, for folks who are, you know, ready to make the jump or want to start preparing, you know, what are some things to be thinking about? What's some concrete advice? We've hit on some of this already. But I'm gonna kind of tease it out a little bit more. So we have a lot of people who are kind of early career to mid-career here listening tonight. And so the question I have for all three of you is, you know, what's your advice on what preparations should an attorney be making to make that transition from private to practice to public interest? Some of this is, I think, maybe even come up, I feel like in one of the questions, you know, how important is pro bono experience? How important is being on a nonprofit board or having that experience? How important is what you did in law school, you know, in order to be able to transition into a public interest role a few years or maybe many years down the line. So let's start with Vidhya, because we haven't heard from you in a little while, and then go to Lynn and Christina.
So let me start off first targeting this question towards the law students, because I know we have quite a few law students. And I will say, so you're not going to make the jump right now, but I will tell you, you're probably trying to decide what to do for OCI and where to go. And the one piece of advice I'll give you is do not make people feel bad, or do not let people make you feel bad for needing to go to a firm first and taking that route. I think there's a lot of kind of belief in the legal services side, as great as it is, and in spite of all the great work, this like, if you haven't done it since day one, you must not really be committed to it. And I just think that's trash, mostly because people have different needs. People need to take different paths. People have, you know, health issues and families and other obligations that they have to take care of. So follow the path you need to follow to take care of yourself. But like the question suggests, be prepared, right? So I would say for attorneys, start building your network. So if you spent, you know, time during law school doing internships or pro bono projects, stay in touch with those people. And then when you're in private practice, go back and say, can I do pro bono, right? Like I would like build that pipeline and build that relationship and keep going back to the same place if you really liked your work. If you want to do different work, that's great. But build networks, get to know folks, join like a junior board or like a pro bono council if they have it. Like do more than just send an email once in a while. Or take on a pro bono case, like really kind of get to know the organizations that you might be interested in working with. So that, and one thing I will tell you is, you know, in the legal services side, it's sometimes easy to transition over from the private sector, and sometimes it's not so easy. And you want to give yourself the best shot by, when it comes time for hiring or making that jump, that somebody at the nonprofit is already an advocate for you and is like, I've worked with that person. And maybe they worked with us as a law student and kept in touch, or they've done pro bono over the last 5 years and consistently, said yes to when we asked for help. So just make sure you create advocates for yourself on the legal services side.
Yeah, I agree with what Vidhya said. I think pro bono experience is one of the best bang for your buck for both getting the experience, showing on paper, and when you do make the jump, telling people um, what you've done to show your ongoing commitment to doing public interest work and also keeping the relationship alive. In addition to preparing for yourself financially by living in a way that is fiscally conservative that will allow you to not be tied into the law firm salary. I will say a little bit more about the experience and relationship. So um, I came out of NYU Law School into practice in New York, and I felt like I'm set. When I'm ready to make a jump, every organization has all these NYU alums. I'm set. And then I moved to LA, and I know nobody and none of the organization, and just starting from scratch. So the approach I took was just I I intentionally took different kinds of pro bono projects from different organizations. And in that process, I tried to try different things, both to find out what are the good organizations to work with, who are the people there. And if I find someone I really admire or have a good relationship working with, I take them out to lunch or coffee, and I have these informational interviews and say, one day I want to be in public interest, how did you get here? And make friends that way and network that way, so that when I was ready to make the jump, I told people like, now I'm ready, I'm gonna go. And can you tell me if you know of any experiences? And the other part is like trying the different practices, because when I came out of the law school, I realized that I did not have the emotional boundary that will allow me to do domestic violence work and not burn out, but I didn't know what else I would be doing. So I just tried a lot of different things. And actually, I think early career is a great time to do pro bono because your billing rates are low. And generally speaking, the firms are much more generous about letting you try different pro bono things. You're also like trying to gain skills. As you get more seniors, if you start billing 600 hours on pro bono, you're going to get talking to and say, you're not billing any more pro bono this year. So really take advantage for your early career time frame to do that.
Really great advice from both Lynn and Vidhya there. A couple things to build on. I was thinking about, when we get candidates for jobs at Advancing Justice, like what are we looking for? Generally folks who apply, have the skills, have a really stellar resume. So is there something else that we're trying to suss out? And I do think trying to get a sense of the person's commitment to public interest, whether that's specific to the API community or, other types of nonprofit service, other marginalized communities. I think if it's not apparent on the resume, we'll try to get to that one way or another. And I do think it's pretty easy to tell if someone is being authentic and has shown a genuine commitment when we get to the stage of interviewing them. So, I think it's, I think it can be easy to tell if someone's sort of just, putting on like a front to make it seem like they are committed. And so definitely, if you already know that that's where you want to end up eventually, would encourage you to take the tips that Vidhya and Lynn shared about, doing pro bono work, getting involved in, an advisory council or, other type of group that supports an organization where you can really build those connections in addition to doing the actual skills-based pro bono work. And in my intro, I touched on how I got into this pro bono director role in large part because of my involvement with the APABA board. And I think, with the networking and, keeping in touch with folks at nonprofits, again, I think taking a genuine approach really makes a difference, not just the like sporadic email here and there, but, asking folks for advice and help, maybe sending them something that, made you think of them, like an article they'd enjoy or something, I think building that rapport, even over like a longer period of time, I think can really make a difference when you do want to call on that person to help go to bat for you if there's an opening at their organization, for example. And I've been wanting to mention this, but I actually initially met Lynn when she was still at Gibson. The firm in the pre-pandemic times used to do like an annual pro bono fair where folks like Vidhya and myself would come and talk to attorneys who were interested in working with us. And I definitely remember Lynn well, and that stood in my mind when she made the transition years later, and then became a colleague of mine on the public interest side. So yeah.
So definitely, it sounds like for those trying to figure out how to prepare, like, staying connected, right? Like everyone talked about, like networks and kind of, it's a credibility issue, right? Like if they're, in public interest jobs, I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that they're easier to get. They are highly competitive. Salaries are going up. There's a lot of interest. So for every position, I think these organizations have, there are multiple applicants, sometimes dozens, if not more. So, I think what I heard was, showing your commitment to the work and to the issues and to the communities that are being served is really important. For all three of you, just wanted to give a chance to go back around again about, how folks think about, packaging the relevant transferable skills, right? Because, I remember when I worked at Asian Americans Advancing Justice and was involved in hiring, I think quite a few of our attorneys came into litigation from private practice, and, some of them had done pro bono or whatever, but actually the key thing we really liked about these candidates were people, and Christina, you were on the, you're working with the litigators a lot, is that you can get really good litigation experience in the private sector, and you can leverage that, right? Like your understanding of state courts or federal courts or the discovery process. Those are skills that sometimes we don't have the funding and the ability to train you on the nonprofit side. So I guess a question for all three of you is, are there other things that you can highlight for folks about how they can think about, like, transferable legal skills that they can bring? So they may not work in the right area, but how do they think about kind of transferable skills? Are there other ways that they can think about, just how to position themselves? And even it can be even as simple as do's and don'ts. Like what should go into a cover letter? Like what should they highlight in the references, for example? How important is it to have a public interest related reference versus a bunch of people at your firm? So I don't know if you have any pet peeves or any kind of examples of things, but what other types of advice besides the kind of networking and staying and building relationships with the community would you offer? And I don't know, I'm gonna maybe go back the other way, Christina, Lynn, and then Vidhya.
Thanks, Karin. It's a great question. I think one of the things I would emphasize here is just that, I don't think that there's one set way to package yourself. And I think this touches on part of what Vidhya was getting to earlier, that there isn't one set way you have to go. You don't have to go straight out. You don't have to do a fellowship necessarily. There are a lot of different ways. And I do think it's almost like a PR pitch, right? Like it's about how you put together what you can bring to the table and whether your heart's really in it. I think that really is something that differentiates our top candidates from one another. Like, what is the vibe that you get from, that like goes beyond what you can see on paper. And that could be a variety of different experiences. It doesn't have to be, I litigated a multi-year class action with the same organization that culminated in this amazing settlement. It could be, I was a, year in and year out volunteer at the same clinic for a long time. I volunteered for so long that I became a trusted mentor and supervisor to other firm attorneys, which is something that happens with some folks that come through our clinics. And that sort of experience is super valuable as well. It doesn't have to be your sort of classic like headline litigation case. Oh, there's the cat, Lynn, as you mentioned. What a cutie. So I think that's what I would share for this particular piece.
Yeah, so I agree with all of those points. I think depending on where you are in your career and what position you think you want to position yourself for, there's other things you might highlight. For example, maybe you're transitioning out later and you're looking for a higher level or managerial role at a nonprofit. So look for opportunities to develop the managerial skills. Like law firms, at least the ones I've been at, not very great at training managers and not very great at having like managerial roles for people to have. However, I took on doc review projects. And I was able to point to all the doc review projects I ran and say, I managed a team of 30 people and like they were all over the place and we set the system up and blah, blah, blah. That's transferable skill. What I always look at first when I get a applicant, whether they're from private practice or not, is the cover letter. Some people just have like, I'm interested in your job, here's my resume. That's a wasted opportunity, especially if you're trying to make a transition. Use a cover letter to tell your story. Tell your personal story. Why are you making the transition? Because that's a big hurdle you want to get over. And then package your skills. Like, are you going for a managerial job? Then you talk about your supervisory or leadership background, and the people like your pro bono experience and like system building. Are you going for a staff attorney role? Talk about how you are a quick learner, you like try different areas and you were the lead lawyer on this thing or that thing. You're thinking about going for a particular kind of practice. Talk about all the pro bono work that you did in that particular practice and why it's personally important to you. There's different pathways, as Christina said, but I think the cover letter is a great place to start, and like really your elevator pitch should be in the cover letter. Can I just add a don't? I sometimes have interviews with people from private practice, and you ask them, why do you want this job? Why do you want to transition? And the answer is, well, I've been at a firm for a number of years. I think I'm ready. Like I'm ready now. I feel like that's not quite enough. Like, especially the people who are a little bit more junior, they're applying for a managerial role. Like, I'm a mid-level associate now. My next job is going to be, a more senior level job, and therefore I'm applying for this job. I don't really know that that's very compelling. And also, if you're kind of a generic, your story is a generic, I want to do something meaningful, but there's nothing in there about why are you coming to Tzedek or advancing justice or ICLC, then that's also like, well, did you even do your homework? Kind of when you're interviewing firms, if you're just like, I want to do a firm job, but not why I want to be a Mayor Brown. That can be like, I don't know if you really care enough about this job.
So because everyone has a different way they do things, I'm gonna contrast what Lynn just said and say I almost never read the cover letter. I don't know why, but I think a part of it has to do with the fact that I interview about 50 to 75 people each year, and I just I'm like an SAT instructor at this point. Like I'm skimming through it. But what I do look at, the very first thing is I look at your resume. And I got to say, I'm always shocked by the people who like put at the very top of their resume, like you're going for a public interest work, and they spend, a paragraph talking about trademark work. And then at the bottom, they put their pro bono work. I'm like, move that to the top, like be strategic, right? Like your resume is this living, breathing document that you can shift around and you can tailor it. So if you went to law school 10 years ago, like you don't need to put that at the top anymore. Like we got it. You went to law school, like stick that at the bottom and make the first thing, the pro bono work that you did. And then tell me about like all the, positions you hold related to public interest work. Like if you're on a board or if you've been given like the pro bono award by Advancing Justice, like tell me that stuff. And then tell me that you went, to USC law school 10 years ago. Like it's fine. So I think I'm still surprised by how many people feel like they have to keep their resume looking the exact same. And it should be tailored to every single job you go and look for. That's not to say that you should pad it. But if you've done significant pro bono, like make that the first thing under the name of your firm. I will say that the things, so I'm on my office's hiring committee. So I hire for everybody from, paralegals to directors. And the thing that consistently is like, the thing that we look for is, especially for people making a transition. And even if you're not making a transition, even just coming from, advancing justice to inner city can be sometimes a hard leap, maybe because of the job you're applying for. And have you done that type of work before? So what I would say is, focus on the skills when you interview or when you send in your materials, focus on the skills that took you a long time to learn. So for example, like if you are applying for a litigator position, even if it's in housing work, like focus on the fact that you know how to litigate already. Like that's a big hurdle you don't have to cross, and they don't have to teach you that. They have to teach you housing law. Now that is a hurdle you're going to have, and that is going to be a learning curve for you, but it's a lot easier for you to learn housing law. There's less of it, and depending on what area you're practicing in, it may take you less time to kind of familiarize yourself with it than it does to really learn like how to litigate a case from beginning to end. So kind of highlight those things and like show that there are fewer hurdles than they may actually think. Be honest about the hurdles you have. So like you've never done an eviction, cop to that. Don't pretend like, oh, I did a housing clinic 15 years ago in law school in Boston. So now like, I totally don't like, don't do that. Just say, I've done a little bit of it as a law student. I don't have any recent experience with it, but I learned quickly. Like, just be honest about it. And I will say the one thing that is usually the biggest hurdle to folks that I've seen trying to make a transition is your direct client work. Because again, that is something that is really hard to teach. And that is something you have to be pretty good at from day one. Like we don't have time to teach you how to talk to a client, like the foundational stuff. Now, maybe how to, deal with like a particularly, complicated client issue, like those kinds of things you're going to learn, right, as you practice. But if you can get some really good experience, like utilizing trauma-informed practices and client-centered lawyering, and this is beyond like the law school classes you take, but you're going to get it through pro bono work. So like, work with clients who are DV survivors, work with veterans who have survived, physical and mental trauma, like work with really tricky client populations who have gone through a lot so that you can show that, look, I've already gained a bunch of the skills I'm going to need to do legal aid work, especially if you want to do client-centered work. So, so try to get the experience that it's going to take you a long time to learn. Because I guarantee you, your legal aid organization does not have the time or resources to train you as if you were a brand new attorney.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your words of wisdom. Certainly some of this is stuff I could have used when I was trying to transition out. But I do think, basically one of the things I want to underscore is if this is something you're interested in doing, don't rush into it, but, take the time and the work to kind of get ready, right? Make the relationships, figure out what skills what you're good at, what you want to do, what you don't want to do when you make a jump, figure out why you want to do what you want to do. We had promised to do a 1-hour panel that was moderated and then open it up for questions. So I am going to open it up and I'm going to ask our APABA host, Travis, I think is still here somewhere. I think we're going to try to do it so if folks want to unmute and ask a question versus typing at us, hopefully you'll be able to do that. And Travis, I don't know if folks will actually be able to chat with each other. If not, I'm only asking because I think at least one of the panelists had some job and volunteer opportunities at Central California Legal Services to share. If not, one of us can drop that in. But why don't we open up? So let's transition to kind of a more open Q&A. Wanted to thank Lynn and Christina and Vidhya for sharing what they have so far. And I also encourage them, because I think if you're inspired by tonight's panel, to start taking a look at the possible positions. I think all of them have open positions. It is a very good time to make the jump into public interest. There is a lot of openings at every single legal organization. And I think Christina mentioned this in one of the Q&As. In all my years in public interest, I think there are more opportunities for young people, like young lawyers with limited experience, to actually get hired on. I mean, for many years, it was very, very hard to get hired in. I mean, the joke was that, every position wanted 3 to 5 years, but nobody was willing to give you the first 3 years so you could have 3 to 5 years. Now there are opportunities. I think housing is an area, and immigration, these are areas that have received a lot of funding in the last 5 or 6 years. So I invite them to share job ops. And then I want to see how we can do the questions and answers. I don't see any in the open queue.
If anybody wants to ask a question live, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you so you can give your question verbally.
Okay, I guess while we are waiting for that, I'm going to ask one question, maybe for the three panelists, and then we can jump back to any questions that pop up. But I think one thing I did want to ask you at some point before we close was, you all left private practice, I think, in the hopes of making a difference of some sort. And can you comment on it? Do you feel like you're doing that now? Do you feel like the work you're doing is more connected? Some of you have kind of already directly said this or alluded to it, I think, like the patent work, for example. But for all of you, I think, Christina, I know when we talked earlier, you definitely had thoughts on this, but Vidhya and Lynn as well, while we see if there's questions from the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Karin. And I know that I touched on this earlier, but I really get a lot of satisfaction from finding the right fit for a pro bono placement. So, meaning someone who has the right experience and interest and capacity, most importantly, to do, we have a guest. Rowan Schaff. To do pro bono with us, and also can help our staff build their capacity to serve clients. And I think with my general counsel hat, because it's a position that had never existed before I came into it, it's been really satisfying to mitigate risk and build systems and processes to help us run the organization in a better way. And I really appreciated being able to lean on our pro bono partners to help act as outside counsel for those projects as well. So that's been really wonderful.
I wanted, so I never had the opportunity to work directly with clients, but I like to think that some part of my job, has a direct impact on clients, right? And whether they have an advocate and offering our organization the ability to serve more people by bringing in outside support. I will say, when the election happened in 2016, there was really no better place to come the morning after than to a legal aid organization, because one, everybody felt the way you did. But even over the 4 years after that, there were a lot of things outside our control, and our clients were dealing with a multitude of problems, but at least you felt like every day you were doing something, like you did something. It wasn't always successful. You couldn't always do everything you wanted to do, but you kind of felt like you were contributing to people who were really kind of trying to save others. And that is a very powerful thing. So not to pat myself on the back or any of the others, but I think it was just personally, it felt good to know that, like you always say in your mind, like, oh, I wish I could be doing this. I'm like, I'm doing a little something every day. And that's sort of a nice feeling to have. And especially, I know Karin touched on this, like you get to go and work with folks who are like-minded in their commitment to something, or in their commitment to a legal issue or a specific cause. And that's pretty great too. And in my particular role as pro bono director, I sort of get to decide how I want to do my job, and I get to do it from the other side of the world, and I get to kind of run the show. And I would never have been able to do that at a firm. Like I just wouldn't. And yes, maybe when you're a partner, but you still have a client. And now, like, yes, I have, bosses I report to, but for the most part, I'm really trusted to kind of do my job. And I get to be really creative and think through and strategize how I want to do it. And that's a satisfaction I don't think you get in very many places in the workforce.
I agree with Vidhya. I think that especially when the world becomes more and more troubling, to know that, when you wake up and you start working, that you're contributing to the right side of the equation can feel like a mental health bomb. Like at least I'm doing something and I'm on the right side, and I don't feel so hopeless even during the time that it can feel very hopeless for everyone. I also want to say, like, we are also making a difference by being like minority women in these roles, right? Like I think just like law firms, there's still a older generation of leadership and legal aid that are older white men. They're being they're being replaced now. But when I first started the director of litigation role, I met a lot of other directors of litigation who are the older white men, and there were moments where I felt like I don't look anything like these people. But then one of my colleagues said, well, maybe that's the point. Maybe we are what is needed to be something that looks different and thinks different and does different. Maybe this is what the organization needs. Maybe this is what the client needs. Maybe this is what this field needs. And so, I mean, I don't think that that has to be a nonprofit. Like, whether you're in a law firm, you're like the first person to occupy this role as an Asian person, or you're at government, or you're in-house. I think we do make a difference, but I definitely think that legal aid is special in terms of making a difference for people.
Can I jump onto something that Lynn just said, because I know a lot of or offices in the legal profession are thinking about diversity, right, and how to improve it and increase it and kind of build a workforce that looks more like the people that you're representing. And legal aid is no different. And I know that we have some folks from other legal aid organizations in the audience. And one thing that still surprises me is that a lateral candidate from a law firm or like an in-house position is still not always favored at a legal aid, right? I talked about this before, that they want folks who've kind of done legal aid from day one. And one of the consequences of that is you really tend to leave out people of color, because a lot of people of color, especially if they're first generation or first lawyers or whatever it may be, may have to go to the private sector. They may have to take that path for financial reasons or family obligations or whatever it may be. And by kind of discounting the fact that you can get really good legal aid attorneys who started off at law firms, you're actually doing a disservice and preventing more diversity. So I just want to throw it out there that I wish legal aid organizations also kind of opened up what their definition of what a pipeline should look like. And it should absolutely include, people of color who went to law firms, became good litigators, or became really great at, tackling administrative law cases, and give those folks a shot, because, they were smart enough to become lawyers, and they'll pick things up quickly, and take a chance on them, even if they didn't, go the legal aid route, their entire profession.
Yeah, I want to underscore what Vidhya said, which is, I think that, in all my years here, and I'm pretty sure that I'm the oldest of us on the panel, even though we all have a lot of years of experience. I mean, I have seen so many different paths that people have taken into public interest. And so it's, you should, I think if you take nothing else away from the panel, one thing I hope you will take away is that if you this is the work you want to do at some point in your career, you can find your way to it. It is never too late. And even if you strike out, I interviewed for jobs and I did not get the first few jobs I interviewed for. So you shouldn't also think that the first job you're going to get it. If you don't get it, like somehow that's a sign that you're stuck where you are. I mean, I interviewed, across in different cities and different roles before I landed, the job that kind of, led me to an organization I spent 20 years with, and I would not have expected that when I left. So don't lose faith, don't lose hope. One thing I wanted to ask all three of you that came in earlier, kind of pre-panel, someone asked a question. It was actually somebody who was had not yet entered law school. And so I think all three of your organization, and the question was, what kind of experience could someone get that's not yet in law school and maybe is considering doing public interest or being a lawyer? And I think all three of your organizations do take volunteers and have positions as well. And so I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that, because I certainly have I do actually encourage you, if you want to go to law school, graduating from college, working a few years, because, law may not be the thing you want to do. You may realize you really want to do public policy advocacy or be a social worker. So I'm wondering if Lynn and Vidhya and Christina, if you're still there, if you have any thoughts for people who are not yet in law or have friends that, are considering how to get into this line of work.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have volunteer opportunities for everything from intake to actually doing some policy work, research work. We also actually hire litigation secretaries and sometimes paralegals if you have the right credentials, either paralegal certificate or having already worked in a law office for a year, you could be hired on as a paralegal too. And that that allows you to do a lot of like lawyer adjacent work. And then, like Karin said, you might try and decide that this is really great for you, and you might try to decide, no, this is not for me. I don't want to go to law school. But all of those things are available for college students.
Yeah, I think definitely get some internships under your belt, right? Like go and work with legal aid organizations, go volunteer your time. And actually the really nice thing is now I have been hearing that more and more organizations are providing like stipends to students so that you're not working completely for free, or at least covering like your costs of work, right? Like covering if you have to work remotely, like I know our organization does that. And then a lot of schools are covering like transportation costs and things like that so that you can actually get the experience. And then, you know, you can get some funding too. So try to get those. And also, if you really know you want to do something specific as a lawyer, like, you know, you want to work with low-income communities in Los Angeles, you know, in Boyle Heights or in Koreatown or something, like, you know, that that's what your life's work is. Take that time to learn the language because I guarantee you that will make you a whole lot more marketable because there's still not, you know, a ton of candidates who come in who have all the language capacities we need. But if you can say like, look, I'm a litigator and I don't know housing law, but I'm fluent in Spanish, you will get a second interview, like you just will. So, so go learn the language as an undergrad, like go major or minor in a language.
I also want to just add that, you know, don't assume that legal aid doesn't have the kind of job for you. So like, for example, Tzedek has openings for like transactional lawyers because we have a small business development program, which is not very commonly seen in legal aid. But you know, if you think you want to be in public interest, but you're like, well, but I'm a tax lawyer, or but I'm a M&A lawyer, don't don't just give up, actually look into it. Sometimes the unusual paths, the niche practices are really where you kind of find your right place. I uh, I really got into FCPA work because I spoke Chinese, and people said like you can't be a litigator if you want to do Asia work. The only Asia work is transactional work, but then when they had to hire people for FCPA work, I was the only person who also speak Chinese. The same goes with legal aid. Like if you're interested in public interest, you know, look for and like talk to people about, I'm interested in this and I have these skill set. You know, what do you think? And then you will find a path, even if it's not obvious.
That's a great point, Lynn, because I remember, I mean, I feel like there is a perception that most of the pro bono work, for example, is doing direct services or litigation, right? And that is very common, right? Law firms are co-counsel, big lawsuits, you know, that gets in the news, that get you really good trial experience or discovery experience. And then there's a lot of opportunities to do things like immigration cases or domestic violence survivor cases. But Christina had to drop off. Folks might have seen it in the chat. I think this is, you know, fact of life. Sometimes your kids melt down in the middle of your panel and you got to go. But, you know, her role as general counsel sort of, you know, there's actually, I think I've seen a move even in the last 5 or so years of people kind of like needing, nonprofits realizing that, you know, we need things like in-house counsel to help the nonprofits, you know, as staff unionize, as we, you know, buy real estate, you know, in order to have affordable housing complexes. There's actually a lot of roles that people who are trained as non-litigators, but as lawyers, familiar with contracts and deals and real estate can actually be super helpful, even IP. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do. So don't think that there isn't a role for you. And sometimes there may not be a posting. I would say, and I don't want to speak for the other folks here, but I remember at Advancing Justice, sometimes somebody would come to us and say, I'm really interested in X, like, is there a way for you to use me? And we'd be like, oh my God, yeah, we could. We just, you know, we didn't post it because it's so niche. So yes, you're an IP lawyer and you can help advise us on some of the issues around our logo and trademarks. So, so don't be afraid to also seek out specific things and ask questions. Again, you might get turned down the first couple of times, but you don't know the third or fourth time might be, you know, the magic, you know, organization. So one other thing I wanted to mention is I dropped into chat some links to resources that might be helpful for folks who are on this path of figuring out your career. A couple of them, one is kind of more general structured advice around making a career pivot. Harvard has an ebook on moving into what they call public service work, which includes government and nonprofit. And UCLA actually has a bunch of specific guides on specific career areas. So if you're interested in criminal law or working in employment and labor or immigration, I think may not be out yet, but will be posted soon. So there are a lot of resources you can find online to help you start to think through what could an employer look like, what are some skills, what are some things I should be thinking about. So in addition to what we're sharing tonight, I wanted to share those. And then I don't think Travis has not flagged any questions. So are there any audience questions? Because if there are not, I'm going to.
I think we have a hand
we have
raised,
one
Sarah.
question. Let me.
Oh, you do? Okay,
yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't see the raised hand.
Sorry, from Sarah Kim. Let me unmute.
Great.
Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. Thank you so much for
Hi.
speaking to this panel. I'm glad I can't turn on my video because it's 10 p.m. where I am. But I'm actually an undergraduate summer clerk at Tzedek, and I'm on the intake team. And I was actually just wondering, what are some specific things that you all do to practice self-care, even as a volunteer for me, you know, not being able to pick up a call means somebody loses valuable time on like a 3-day notice to quit. And, you know, that can be a very heavy emotional burden. And I was just wondering how you all deal with that kind of thing, just specific practices that you might do.
That is a great and thoughtful question. Vidhya or Lynn, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll say, so I started taking care of myself probably later than I should have. I really started kind of thinking about like making time for myself after my first kid was born. I probably should have done it in law school. So if I had to give myself advice and take myself back in time, what I would say is find the thing that calms you down. For me, it's Pilates. It's the thing that I do an hour, a couple times a week that everybody in the household knows, don't bother mom. Like she is in that room. She's with her instructor, like on Zoom, and you do not come into that room. Like there will be hell to pay. And so that is what I do. And what I would say is, once you kind of head down the path of being a lawyer, even law school is stressful. It just is. It's hard. It's you know, I don't think you have to wait to be a public interest lawyer before you realize that you're going to be stressed out and need time for yourself. So form a habit when you're in law school, like figure out what that is. Do you work out? Do you go cook? Do you talk on the phone with your friends? Like whatever it is, and keep that habit going. Because I guarantee you, it'll serve you well in law school. It'll serve you well when you take the bar exam. It'll serve you well when you get the results of the bar exam. It'll serve you well for, you know, whatever job you do after. So I would just say, figure out what that is for you and start it early. Like don't wait till you are dealing with like an emotionally charged client meeting to figure out, oh, I need to like figure out how to, you know, take care of myself and keep myself, you know, calm and ready to do this work the next day.
Yeah, so I am in therapy for many reasons, but I think therapy is a lifeline for me. And I think most of us in this day and age, probably if you have the means, should be in therapy, but definitely if you're in public interest, you should be in therapy. I also am in a Monday to Friday mediation group. Most days, 8 o'clock to 8:30, there's a free Zoom mediation that I try to go to as many times as possible. Even if I just like get on the mat and then fall asleep, I'm told by people around me that that makes a difference. They can tell if I did it or not. And then since I was in 4th grade, I've been a choir singer, and since I became a lawyer, it became more important for me to protect the time for choir practice, because that's 2 hours a week during choir season that I don't think about anything work related. I only think about can I see the next note on the page? And in a way, it's very meditative. I don't do Pilates because I don't exercise, but it's the same thing. Like, take your mind off of it, use a different part of your brain, something that gives you joy. If it's like planting something on your balcony or like petting your cat or whatever, but protect that time because that is just as important. And then finally, I will just say it is even harder now that we're in remote work, still a lot, but really have some boundaries about, like, I stop working, my shift ends on the intake team at 6 o'clock. I'm going to shut it down. No matter what happens after 6 o'clock, I'm going to shut it down so that I could be available to do this again at 9 o'clock, right? Like, there are times when you have to work later on weekends, but those times should be very rare because otherwise you will burn yourself out.
Yeah, thank you, both of you, for that. And I will just underscore, I think learning to draw lines and to say no. I mean, it's hard, right? Because if you say yes to person A, there's always going to be person B and C behind them. Like, you just have to, kind of keep yourself healthy enough to be able to be there for the long haul, right? Because if you burn out and flame out in 3 months, that's not going to help you or the clients. And so it's hard, because I think learning to say no is hard, particularly for people who choose public interest work, right? Because we do this because we want to help folks. We've all talked about, how important it is to kind of feel the connection to the clients, but also that connection can be dangerous, right, if you don't draw the line. So I think it's just learning those boundary drawing, and if it takes therapy, if it takes all these other things, that's something that I think, your generation is doing better. I'm an old enough generation where I felt like I came to this work at a time when that was not even, like, we didn't talk about that. Like, you just worked really hard and you just kept working, like nobody talked about self-care. And so I'm really grateful that people are asking these questions and pushing these things in nonprofit workplaces as well. I want to acknowledge that we are almost at the end of the time we had set aside. Travis, are there any other hands up? Because for some reason I can't see those.
Not right now, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
I saw that Christina dropped her email in the chat thread earlier, and Lynn and Vidhya, if you're comfortable dropping a contact email either for your organization or yourselves, if you could go ahead and do that. I think we can wrap up and give you back a couple minutes of your evening. I would just maybe say to Lynn and Vidhya, do you have any final words you want to say, you want to leave folks with who are, kind of thinking about this transition to public interest work? And Vidhya, start with you and then go to Lynn, and then I'll wrap.
No, I was going to ask Lynn to go first because I'm thinking.
Yeah,
I wanted to come up with something really profound. So.
I don't have anything profound to say. I'm just going to say, go back to the financial concern. It's a real concern, but I hope that the worst time to transition ever, the worst time to make a financial jump ever story inspires you. If I can get through it and I didn't go bankrupt, I think you can too. Life finds a way if that's what you want. And at the end of the day, money you can earn again, but feeling a sense of fulfillment, knowing that your place is the right place, having your values aligned with your life's work, that all counts for something.
Thank you, Lynn, for those words, and also for the few extra seconds because I got to think. So I would say, I think we've given a lot of great insight and advice about ways you can prepare yourself and things you should do or not do. And I'll just say at the end of the day, wherever you go first, whether it's legal aid or not legal aid, and you're looking to kind of do public interest work, just learn how to be a good lawyer. Right? Like, learn how to write well, learn how to really be a good litigator or a transactional attorney or whatever it is that you want to do, and build a good reputation for yourself. Because then I think the transition will be a whole lot easier no matter what path you're trying to take. I think, like I said, legal aid organizations, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources to kind of do what law firms can do. So if you come in already a really strong candidate and there's things that you have to learn on top of that, that's fine. Like, that's manageable. But if you come in and you don't know how to write a motion, or you don't know how to do. So, maybe some basic things involving cases, like that's a much bigger hurdle to cross. And it's probably going to take you a lot longer to make that transition. So just from day one, just think about, how can I learn the skills? How can I become really good at them? And then I guarantee you that that path will be a lot easier.
Great. Thank you both for those kind of thoughtful closing words. And I'll just wrap by saying something I've said several times, which is, I think our main message is that we want to encourage folks who want to make this jump to do it thoughtfully, to do it strategically, but not to be stressed about there needing to be a certain timeline you have to be on, or a certain path that is the right path. So you should feel free to reach out to us. There are many people in our sector who have done the kind of private public, and some people go back, right? I mean, the other thing is, if part of what's holding you back is like, I don't know if this is the right thing. I mean, people move in and out of jobs. They move between private and public interests as well. So it's, careers are much more fluid than they were 15, 20 years ago. A lot of people move around every few years. So don't be afraid to explore and to take a chance. So thank you to Lynn and to Vidhya and to Christina in absentia, and to APABA and APALA for hosting us. We are really glad you spent some time with us this evening. We hope we've inspired those of you who are thinking about this to kind of take the next step. Reach out to any of us if you have any questions, and also please support APABA and APALA so they can keep doing programs like this. We focused heavily on legal services and nonprofit advocacy groups. If you can also be interested in things like criminal law, working in government. Those are very somewhat different conversations. And so hopefully down the line, we will also do some panels along those lines. But for this particular panel, I want to say thank you all for being here. Good luck if you move along this path, and reach out if we can provide support. So good night, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good night.